history of rock and roll. So thank you, Denny, for coming tonight.
I started a band called the Lost Souls in the 60s, and this has a lot of kind of fun pictures in it, and finally, 2019, after 1965, there's a CD out and also a double vinyl out of the Lost Souls. There's not that many remaining, but I think this might be fun to pass that around and see some of the crazy pictures from the 1960s. They're fun to look at, I think. This whole talk came about because when Bill and I were talking, when Eric Carmen passed away, Eric Carmen from the Raspberries, he was saying, did you know him? And I said, well, yeah, I knew him, but I didn't know him like Jim Bonifani. Jim Bonifani, who played drums with me when I played in the choir. Choir had "It's Cold Outside," all that,
I remember that.
And Jim was really good friends with Eric and had played in the Raspberries and done all kinds of things with him and was in touch with him and everything. I knew Eric in the 1960s, and we both were, we would just talk about how the bands looked cool. We were 16 years old, or the Stones were good, or how much we liked this person, how they played music, and it was all small talk, so to speak. But Bill said to me, he said, but don't you think it's sort of like almost a corporate grieving? It's like Cleveland has lost, Michael Stanley has lost other things. It's almost like as a community, these things were all tied in. And I said, I really do feel that. And I started telling him stories about the 60s and some of the bands and the different people I met. And then it started to, why don't you come to the Historical Society? I go, well, that's okay, that's it. So that's why I'm here. So, Cleveland has the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We all know that. Many people know one of the reasons why we got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Alan Freed started rock and roll in the 50s. He called it rock and roll. He had the first concert, Moo Dog Ball, and he had one, I think, at WHK Auditorium, and then there was also the first rock and roll riot, which is, Cleveland's known for that. That's good. But the big thing I think was when the USA Today did a poll, and in the I think it was in the 70s. I think it was the 70s. And they asked where do you think it should be, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And you could call, and back then it was 50 cents to call. And they said, how many people would want to call it? Where would you like to have it? So New York got maybe 4,000 votes. Memphis, because of Elvis, got 3,000 or 4,000. Cleveland got 104,000 votes. And so people in Cleveland spent $52,000 to say that they wanted. So I'm sure that opened their opened them up. Maybe. But then when you really think of it, this was our city. The state gave tax breaks for the Rock Hall. Really wanted it. Our mayor, I think, was George Voinovich. I think it was George Voinovich at the time. He really wanted it. Cleveland made them welcome. They funneled all kinds of money to them, and Cleveland is fantastic at doing museums. We have a museum of art. We know all of that. Not everybody knows that in the country, but we know that, how great Cleveland is at doing museums. So it just happened that way. Cleveland has had the infamous sports things, but also it's had other things that we're known for. And in the 1970s, after the bands in the 60s, Cleveland was dubbed the New Liverpool by many writers. They thought Cleveland had such a great active music scene, and if you think of Liverpool was a working class shipping yard, more blue collar. Cleveland, I don't know how blue collar Cleveland really is anymore, but Cleveland was really blue collar, it never really had I did an article with a guy named Richie Unterberger, who's I've distributed my own music through the years, small, but kept me connected. And there's a writer in California named Richie Unterberger, and he wanted to write a history on Cleveland. And I told him the stuff the music was in the 60s, the music that we were into. And it turned out that he said he had written many things about many cities, but Cleveland, more than almost any other place, was really, really affected by the British invasion. The bands back then, when I was in the band, and the Eric Carmens and the Joe Walshes and all of the different people, everybody was into going downtown and getting English magazines to know about what was happening in England before, like Peter Frampton. We all knew about him in 1965 and 66, where Peter Frampton really didn't make it till the 70s, you know. And so Stevie Marriott, who was in Humble Pie, we all knew him from the Small Faces. All the bands were very, 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 very influenced by the English invasion, and I didn't really come up with that. I just thought that was normal, but it wasn't. That was a very unique thing about Cleveland. And you know, Richie heard my songs, the Lost Souls CD, and he heard my cassette, and he heard the choir, and he was just puzzled why Cleveland never really got more exposure, like even a Detroit, or why didn't it, like a Nashville, or why didn't it get more like a Texas or a New York or a California? Why not? And I always come up with the same thing. We're a blue-collar town with blue-collar parents who didn't know what to do with this. We had no basis of well, I know this guy in New York, I know this guy in Nashville. That wasn't, we didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody, and I don't think our parents knew anybody. But our manager was our old Little League manager, you know, and that's not going to get you in the door of record companies. So I think people just didn't know what to do with the music scene that we had. So before I get to my own life, the early bands in Cleveland were more like, I don't know what you'd say, back then there were mods and greasers. Okay, Greasers of the Choir. The Greasers were kind of like Fonzies, except they weren't nice. You know, to me at least, they weren't nice. Because I had long hair, and they were like kind of tough guys, and they had the slick hair. You know. So bands in the early 60s, before the Beatles came over, were some of the big bands were Dave C. and the Sharp Tones, Frank Sampson and the Wailers. Did anybody know these names? Yeah. Okay. Joey and the Continentals, Tom King and the Starfires. He was from Collinwood. Tom King wrote, the Starfires were one of those older bands with horns and dance and stuff like that. But Tom King then was the only band from that era that morphed into what went with the British invasion, which was the Outsiders. Time Won't Let Me, Time Won't Let Me, and they had Respectable, and then Sonny Geraci had a long career after Time Won't Let Me, but that was the only band. They had a song called Stronger Than Dirt. Da 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 da. Not that big. Time Won't Let Me, you know that one, okay. So every American city, from my friend Richie helped me do this, was radically, was affected by the British invasion, but none as much as Cleveland. So now here's where the slides come in, Bill. So here's me. I grew up in Euclid, and then has lived either on 185th Street or Lake County until now. I live in Twinsburg because I married Brenda over there, but I still do everything in Lake County, pretty much. So the first slide that we're going to look at, now these are not so perfect. I did them kind of quick and everything. It's been a crazy summer, so that's me as a little boy. I don't think I've changed that much in some weird way. I don't know why, but that's me as a little boy. So I grew up in Euclid, and after I grew up in Euclid, my parents moved to Willoughby, and I went to Immaculate Conception, and then I went to St. Joseph High School, even though I lived in Willoughby. I lived in Ridge Acres for 5 years, and so that's that. So next is another picture. I was a normal kid. I played baseball, and I met Jimmy Pearsall. I don't know if you know Jimmy Pearsall. Oh, yeah. And I love sports. I invented my own baseball and my own games. I wanted to have a game called Stratomatic, but it was too expensive, so I made up my own games. And I think a lot of my creativity came through those times. But I played for Class F, which was Sturm's Meats in Willoughby. And I was 4'10", and Randy Hart was on my team. And Randy Hart ended up being Northwestern University's line coach. And he was big then, and I was like 4'10" or something. So I finally told my manager, I said, play me or trade me. I used to play at Todd Field and all that. And so I found my guitar. And that's me in Rich Acres on 35620 in Willoughby. And that's me, obviously very happy that I have a guitar. And so next one is, so that got to all 5 of us at St. Joe's High School, there were more of us, we went and took music lessons for 9 months at Soja's. And we moved, not a popular trend today, but we moved from Willoughby back to Euclid. We moved to Euclid, we moved back, and I don't know if it was because I met the band, or it was meant to be, or what happened, but I moved back to be back in Euclid, and that's our first band at my house in Nicholas, and we really were a garage band, weren't we? Literally a garage band. Now, another picture here is us playing, actually, in Willoughby, at, I think it's the Eagles Club, right across from the Presbyterian Church. Yeah, that's us out there. The next picture is, that's at Shore Junior High School.
What year did you play there?
December
In the Eagles, 65.
65, it's the year I graduated.
What's that?
It's the year I graduated.
Yeah, we played there. We played the Eagles Club in 65, and that one over there is actually marked. That's in 65 at the Shore Junior High School. And the next one is Finlandia. And if you want to see something really weird, I'm standing on my amplifier. We were a little bit of an unusual band. I'd never seen a band stand on their amplifier before. And I don't know why we did that. We were 17 years old, or 16. So, next one is a picture of Jade Scott and I. Jade Scott. That's that's after, she put us in the paper, right when we first came out, The Lost Souls. And that's me. We were actually at a Phil Kingi concert, and we both saw each other at a Phil Kingi concert. That's Jade Scott and I. She's a wonderful person, and she passed many years ago. But you could do a whole thing on Jade Scott, and there's just time doesn't permit it. Here's the first article that she did about us in the play Neva, The Lost Souls. And then after this is a picture of Karen Martin. Karen Martin was the Cleveland Art Institute. That's myself, my friend Gary Sawyer. These 2 guys were from the Tree Stumps. And that's at the Institute of Art. And the 2 people from the Tree Stumps were with Michael Stanley. So the local scene consisted of Phil Kingi, Michael Stanley, Eric Carbon, Joe Walsh. It's rich with talent. Next is, I love this. This is me as a kid. That really is like a perfect illustration of what I was bopping around like as a kid. That's again, Karen Martin, who's an awesome artist. Next one is, this is one of the characteristics of the 60s, not just our band, but bands with let me see, I'm getting a little thrown off here. So the Lost Souls band was my first band, and that was at a KSC hall in Euclid. We would just rent out our own hall. I can't imagine a band taking a chance of renting out our own hall. We were teenagers. We rented out a hall. We would get 200 or 300 people. Next one is, that's our first promo. Next one. That is a Hullabaloo. Anybody know about Hullabaloos? Yeah, the Hullabaloos, that was, I think that was North Ridgefield, but the Hullabaloos were an amazing thing. One of the reasons I think the Cleveland music scene back then was so good was that there were all these non-alcoholic places to play for bands. Catholic Youth Organizations, CNIO, every parish, and at that time there were more parishes in Greater Cleveland, everyone had a dance, a teen dance, a non-alcoholic dance. Then we had the KSC halls. We had armories, and the Painesville Armory had things. You could rent out Finlandia Hall if you wanted. And then there were bars too, eventually the Painesville Stables and stuff like that, But, the Hullabaloos were amazing. And eventually the Hullabaloos started off as just a place to play, but I got to open for Alice Cooper when I was later on in Moses. I got to open for Iggy Pop, Ted Nugent, the Amboy Dukes, which is Ted Nugent also. But next thing is another Lost Souls promo. That might be the same picture. Next one. Okay, these are just, some of these things are so crazily photogenic. This is me. I always say Austin Powers would be jealous. The thing is, I had kind of a religious experience when I was 20, and I read that, you should give your clothes away to the poor. And I've always been a sort of a childish, naive person, and I actually went and did it. And I gave that away, so some poor kid got beat up. And that, as you can tell, we were going more into a psychedelic phase at that point. I don't get the raincoat or the cape, but That's me in the middle there. Started off as that nice little guy, but we were a pretty clean band. That's us at the Painesville Stables. And that's a little later. Yeah, it was Lost Souls. This is another one of those photogenic things. My mother made that for me. That's what's called a Nero jacket. The Beatles used to have it. It was kind of a thing of the neighborhood. And she ended up making one for everybody in band, and also Jim Bonafati from the Raspberries of the Choir. We were all friends. Next.
Okay.
Yeah, one more. This is at St. Justin Martyr. And that's at, one of the things about the Lost Souls, I always called Clinton back then the melting pot that didn't melt. You know, it's like you had your Italians, you had your Hungarians, you had all the different neighborhoods. And the Lost Souls was able to be a very mod, long-haired band. At the same time, we had a flute and a sax player, and that made we could play all kinds of different places. And next one. Okay, and that's a picture of Larry Tomczak and I, who was the drummer of the Lost Souls. And he called me up out of nowhere. Larry Tomczak is sort of a pastor. And he called me up out of nowhere last year. He goes, guess what? I got tickets for the Stones. I go, but Larry, this is not what I was expecting for, Larry was, so we saw the Stones. And that was really great. His daughter sells merchandise for concerts. And she was, her friend was selling. So we got some pretty good tickets. We didn't have to pay for them. And we got to see the Stones, and they're 81 years old. Can you imagine that? And okay, so we're going to stop there. So then I was in the Lost Souls for all those years. It was a high school band, a lot of fun. It was great. And some of the other bands that were in there besides the Lost Souls, we came into quite a music scene. Benny Orr was in, there used to be the Upbeat Show. And in the Upbeat Show, Benny, his nickname to all the people knew was Benny 11 Letters, because his name had 11 letters in it. And but Benny Orr played lead guitar, or played guitar in the Grasshoppers, and they played on Upbeat, which was like kind of a local music show. It was a local music show. You had upbeat dancers. So Benny then eventually went on to play for the Cars. So when you hear Best Friend's Girl and all that, Benny's playing in the Cars. Also, other bands that were around there were the Damnation of Adam Blessing. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. Like I have a website by name Denny Carleton, and on there is an interview I did with Ray Bennett from the Damnation of Adam Blessing. It's an amazing interview because they ended up doing an interview. So if you ever want to, you just go on there and go under my name and then go under radio. I ended up doing radio at WELW for 7 or 8 years called the Cleveland Music Connection. And I have all kind of archives on there online, and I don't have them all there. There's a lot of them, but I have enough that if you're interested in those kind of things, they're up there and they're to be listened to. And it's so another band that was around there was Circus. That was more like in the 70s. Does anybody know the Circus? Tommy Dobek from Michael Stanley played in Circus. Another band that was locally was Freeport Express, and Freeport Express had Kevin Raleigh, who was also with Michael Stanley. The Rebel Kind and Glass Harp with Phil Keaggy. So my next band, the Lost Souls, went from into high school, and then I joined the choir. Now the choir that I have is, I always call it the Artifact Choir. I came in, the original choir were pretty much 5 guys from Mentor High School and Euclid High School. And they ended up, while they were in high school, as juniors in high school, ended up recording a record on a Canadian American, and then they were signed to Roulette Records, and they had a #1 hit in Cleveland for 5 weeks, and they were juniors. The lowest were juniors at Mentor High in '67, and it went to number 53 in the charts. And then they were Canadian American, and they went to Roulette Records. So that was the choir that was very, very famous. All the bands seem to really get into, the British music, but of all the bands, they were probably the one that was most known for it. Our band could cross over. A lot of bands had long hair. We all had, what I looked like, we were the real thing. But the choir had the whole sound. The choir ended up, were so good that they opened up for the Loving Spoonful in Euclid Beach. They opened up for the Who. They opened up for the Yardbirds. The Yardbirds had 3 guitar players in their types. Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, Jeff Beck, famous, and Eric Clapton. That's a high level. So the mods and the choir opened for those bands, and they just had it all. The choir was the most popular band. I just had all these bands. So that band went through this crazy musical chairs, and the choir went through musical chairs. You know, they had 5 guys that were doing good, 2 guys went out, another guy came in, that guy went out, another guy came in. This is all within months, you know, changing around all of the time. You know, everybody had a lot of talent, and a lot of people were very ambitious, and it was a different time, and everybody was young. You know, they were 17, 18, 19 years old. Everybody was very young. So the bands went